Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I certainly haven't seen her around the house for a while. Congratulations. Yeah, yeah. What's the name you do the West?
Right now at the...
What's that? Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, they do. It took like a little bit. I feel like because of COVID, they got to stay like that.
Yeah.
You know, it really felt like no, I mean, we were always thinking of it. Yeah, yeah. Like, it was
So we're coming over to your house.
and
Where am I going? You want to ride home? Yeah, you want to ride home?
I used to see her at work.
Just look like you can Right, it had like the, yeah, and, we'll see, we played with this team. It was awesome. Right. And it'll be a good test. I think it's going to be yeah. Our seats. I know, it's crazy.
It wasn't worth the risk. He's gonna get it.
Shalom. Shalom, shalom, l'rachok u'lekarov amar Adonai, which means something a little bit special this year and last. Shalom, shalom to those who are near and those who are far, and those who are far in proper distance and those who are near in spirit. Shana Tova. We prepare to pray as a community. On Rosh Hashanah, we are focusing so much on our individual and personal lives, repairing them, recreating them anew with the power of holiness, the power of God that is given to us to recreate, to make a future for ourselves different than the one that is in our present and in our past. And today, we now do that as a congregation and as a community. Even if we're not guilty of every single one of the shortcomings mentioned, we take responsibility because we know we are all deeply interconnected. On this night, I read on 203, I hereby forgive all who have hurt me, all who have done me wrong, whether deliberately or by accident, whether by word or by deed. May no one be punished on my account, as I forgive and pardon fully those who have done me wrong. May those whom I have harmed by word or by deed forgive and pardon me, whether I acted deliberately or by accident. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. We forgive not because we believe that what was done was unimportant, but because we are prepared to put aside our anger long enough to hear words which reflect remorse and regret, long enough to begin to believe that people have the potential to grow. And finally, the words of Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Every year there descends and radiates a new and renewed light which has never yet shone. For the light of every year withdraws to its source in the Infinite One, who is beyond time. But through the sounding first of the shofar, and now by means of the prayers we utter, a new and superior light is elicited, a new and more sublime light that has never yet shone since the beginning of the universe. Its manifestation, however, depends on the actions of those below and on the merits and penitence during the 10 days of Teshuvah. By the authority of the court on high and by the authority of the court below, with divine consent and with consent of the congregation, we grant permission to pray with those who have transgressed. Bottom of 204, I've designated 2 families who each will be channeling the angelic energy of God, each for their own reasons that I've chosen them, many of which you in the congregation can guess. Please rise, 204. Which way? So you're there, you are there.
Vishiva Shamala Uvishiva Shamata Aldat Hamakom Vadadaga Anumatiri Nirbalel Imha Bayani Kol Nidre Visarei V'charamei, v'koramei, v'kinuyei, v'kinusei, u'shavuot, dindana, u'rishtabana, u'racharimana, V'dyasana al nafshatana miyom kippurim hazeh ad yom kippurim Habalaynu letova kon ikhrada beon kon yehon sharon Shvitin, Betalin, Mutalin, La Sharirin, La Kayamin, Nidrandala Nidre, Vesaranala Sare.
ושבועתנה לשבועות. Kol Nidre v'sarai v'charamei v'konamei v'chinoyei v'kinusei u'shavuot din darna u'rikish tabana u'dacharimana Vidyasana Navshatana Miyom Kippurim Zed Yom Kippurim Habaleinu Letova Kohon Icharanavon Kohon Yehon Sharon Shvikim Shvitim Betelin Uvutalin Lasharirin V'lakayamin Nidrana la Nidre Vesarana la Esare Ushuatana la Shavuot. Kol Nidre v'sarai v'charamei v'konamei v'kinuyei v'kinusei u'shavuot din darna u'rigish tabana u'dacharimana v'diasarna al nafshatana miyom kippurim zed yom kippurim habaleinu letova kohon Icharanavon Kohon Yehon Sharon Shvikin Shvitin Beteilin Uvutalin Lasharirin V'lakayamin Nidrana la Nidre Vesarana la Esare Ushuatana la Shavuot.
V'nislach l'chol ada b'nei Yisrael v'lager hagad b'tocham ki l'chol ha'am bishgaga.
V'nislach l'chol ada b'nei Yisrael v'lager hagad b'tocham ki l'chol ha'am bishgaga. Slach na l'avon ha'am hazeh ki yodel chazdecha v'chaser nasad l'ha'am hazeh mitzrayim v'dheinav v'sham ne'emar vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha kidvarecha Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shechianu, v'kiyamanu, v'gianu lazman hazeh.
We remain standing and turn to page 207.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach, Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Avad.
We may be seated as we continue silently in the service, beginning in Mariv 207.
El Chai v'Kayam, Tamidim lo chalel le'olam vo'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Hamari v'Aravim.
208, we prepare for the Shema.
V'avatcha al tasinu mimenu le'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, Oyev amo Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kivod, Malchuto Leolam Avoed. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, B'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol miodecha, v'ayu hadvarim ha'ela, asher anochi mitzavecha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha, v'veitecha, uvlechtecha, v'aderech, u'shokvecha, uvkumecha, u'kshartam liot al yadecha, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך וישעריך.
Continue silently, 209.
Adonai Elohim Emet.
We continue silently, top of 210.
ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות עושה יפלה מלכותך רובניך ואורכי הים לפני משה זה ויענו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם אבוד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגלל מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Amen. On 211, I'm going to ask all of you to join me, and including those who are streaming the service, say this prayer out loud, the Hashkivenu. We've been doing it out loud in English all through the pandemic, wishing each of us a protection from God. You know, it's a sukkah, it's a filter that filters out the bad but lets in the good. And I think we all have experience of that in our lives at this point. But it filters out not only pathogen, which is specifically discussed, but also fear and anxiety for those who've been suffering, the underprivileged, to those who are hungry, those who have other cares and worries in this time. So let's say it in English and wish everyone that special protection at this point from enemies, physical, pathogenic, spiritual, and emotional. Allow us, Adonai, our God, to sleep peacefully and awaken again to life, our sovereign. Spread over us your canopy of peace. Restore us with your good counsel, and save us for the sake of your name. Shield us, remove from us enemies and pestilence, sword, starvation, and sorrow, and remove the evil forces that surround us. Shelter us in the shadow of your wings, for you, God, watch over and deliver us. And you are the sovereign, merciful, and compassionate. Ensure our going and coming for life and peace, now and forever. May you spread over us your canopy of peace. Baruch atah Adonai, who spreads the canopy of peace over us, over all the people Israel, and over Jerusalem.
ופרוסת עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל. ועל ירושלים.
Amen. As we turn to page 212, we're already preparing for the standing silent prayer, so similar to the normal Amidah, but this one is amplified by the two confessionals that are collective, focusing so much on how we create worlds with our speech, reminding us that God created the universe through speech, each thing a saying. We are given the power of God to create with the worlds that we make with our words, and on this night, we are called to take responsibility for the worlds that we have created and the ability to create new worlds with our words and with our deeds. In the Silent Amidah, you're welcome to close your eyes and think of how you're recreating your life for the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, to think of your way forward, or to pray the liturgy with a focus on the two confessionals. I ask you to rise in the middle of 212 for the Chatzi Kaddish.
כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם, לטהרתכם מכל חטאותיכם, לפני אדוני תתארו, יתקדש שמי רבה, ויאמר דברה חירותי ועמי מלכותי, וחייכון ויומכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה ידברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא וידבר ולעולם שמי לקודשה ברכו לעילא מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבקתה ונחמתה דמירן ביומה ומרו אמן.
213 through 221, Hebrew, English readings, or your own personal meditations. When you're finished your prayers, you may be seated, but if you're not finished, please continue. As some are finishing their silent prayers, the rest of us are continuing on page 223.
Yahale, Yahale, Tachanuneinu meyarav, V'yavo, V'yavo, Shabbateinu miboker, V'yera rinunenu ad arev, V'yera, V'yera rinunenu ad arev. Yahale, Yahale, Koleinu meyarav, V'yavo, V'yavo, Tzidkateinu miboker, V'yera piryonenu ad arev, V'yera, V'yera piryonenu ad arev.
May our voices rise up at evening, our righteous acts arrive with the dawn, our redemption transform the dusk. May our suffering rise up at evening, our forgiveness arrive with the dawn, our purity transform the dusk. And may our prayers rise up at evening, coming to you with the dawn, transforming us at dusk.
Yahale, Yahale, Dov Keinu meyarav, V'yavo, V'yavo, Gileinu miboker, V'yera bakashatenu ad arev, V'yera, V'yera bakashatenu ad arev. Yahale, Yahale, En kateinu meyarav, V'yavo, V'yavo, Elecha miboker, V'yera eleinu ad arev, V'yera, V'yera eleinu ad arev.
Service continues 225.
Hadesham alach, ve'aguf alach, Husa, Husa, halam alach, Hadesham alach, ve'aguf shalach, Adonai aseh, le'aman shemacha. Atanu al shimcha Adonai v'aseh leman shmecha, Borkevot shimcha ki el chanun v'ragom shmecha, leman shekla Adonai v'salat lavonenu ki ravu. Darkecha Eloheinu le'arichapecha la'arayim ve'latovim v'hitilatecha. למענך אלוהינו עשה ולא לנו ראה עמידתנו דלים וריקים.
למענך אלוהינו עשה ולא לנו ראה עמידתנו דלים וריקים.
תעלה ארוחה עליה לנידף, תנחם עפר ואפר.
תעלה ארוחה לא לנדף, תנחם על עפר ואפר.
תשליך חטאינו ותחום במעשיך, תראה כי אין איש עשה עמנו צדקה.
תשליך חטאינו ותחום במעשיך, תראה כי אין איש עשה עמנו צדקה. We continue on page 227.
כי הנה כחומר כי יד היוצר, ברצותו מרחיב, וברצותו מקצר, כן אנחנו בידך. חסד נוצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, כי הנה כאבן ביד המסתית. ברצותו חז, וברצותו מחטאת, כן אנחנו בידך, מחיי המוטף, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. כי הנה כגרזן ביד החרש, ברצותו דיביק לאור, וברצותו פירש, כן אנחנו בידך, תומך אני ורש, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר.
As the helm in the hand of the sailor who holds the course or abandons it at will, so are we in your hand, good and forgiving God. Recall your covenant, do not heed the accuser. As glass in the hand of the glazier, who shapes or melts it at will, so are we in your hand, pardoner of sin and transgression. Recall your covenant, do not heed the accuser. And as cloth in the hand of the draper, who drapes or twists it at will, so are we in your hand, righteous God. Recall your covenant, do not heed the accuser.
כי הנה ככסף ביד הצורף, ברצותו מחזק, וברצותו מצרף, כן אנחנו בידך, ממציא למזור טרף, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר.
On 229, we enter into the 13 attributes. We have to remember Jewish metaphysics for a moment. Jewish metaphysics is that Gevura precedes chesed in our actions, meaning that when we understand the consequences of our actions and the power that we have thereby, and we regret actions that have caused harm individually and collectively, and we take steps for changed behavior, all of that is part of Gevura, of accountability, of the power of consequence. But when we take those steps, there's an influx from the divine of chesed, which is like momentum to our change. And that, I think, is the thing that's often missing in the public discourse, and is missing in the element of hope, redemption, that Jewish tradition provides, which is, yes, the consequences of our actions are profound, and that too is part of God. But when we recognize them and when behavior is changed with true remorse, the wind is at our sails. And the attribute of chesed, the attributes of compassion and of graciousness come our way. Put the wind at our backs and take us to a different future. Page 229.
El melech Yoshev HaKisei Rachamim. El Horeita lanu lomar shalosh esreis, or lanu hayom b'ri shalosh esrei, k'mo she'edat lenav k'mekeh kedem, k'mo shekatuv. Vayeret Adonai ben Avit Yosef imosham, vayikra v'shem Adonai, vayavor Adonai, al panav vayikra. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'chanun, Herech Apayim, V'rav chesed v'yemed, Notzer chesed lalafim, Nosei avon v'fesha, V'chata'a v'nakei, V'salach lavonenu, V'unchatatenu unchatanu, Salach lanu avinu ki chatanu, V'chalanu malkeinu ki fashanu, ki ata Adonai tov v'salach, v'rav chesed l'chol korecha.
I'm going to ask you to turn to page 231, where there are two of my favorite medieval Hebrew poems, one by Ibn Gebira and the other by Yehuda Halevi. And since I can't figure out which one to do because I love them both so much, I'm going to ask everyone in the congregation who's here in the room to to do the second one. I'm going to do the first one, and I'd like you to do the second one. Even before I came to be, your kindness accompanied me. For from nothing you formed me. Who was it who fashioned me, who spun the clay, fired the kiln, and hardened me? Who breathed life into me? Opened the belly of the deep, pulled me out, guided me from childhood to today, gave me understanding, filled me with wonder. Though I am but clay in your hands, was it not you who made me? Truly you, not me. Yet I confess my sins, and I do not say that I was fooled by another who beguiled me. Why would I try to hide my sin from you? For even before I came to be, your kindness accompanied me. And will you continue with Adonai, where shall I find you?
Where shall I find you? High and hidden is your place. And where shall I not find you? The world is full of your glory. I sought your closeness. I called to you with all my heart. And going out to meet you,
I found you coming toward me. Service continues on page 233, and we're about to do Shema Kolenu, the sort of crying out to God to hear us. And this is certainly not Yehuda HaLevi, what I'm about to share with you. It's something that I wrote for myself, and I told myself that I wouldn't share it with you. So here I'm going to share it with you. In the crying out that many of us have been doing for some time, we've been trying so hard to serve God and serve others. And often it feels that everything we do is wrong. So as you know, there are three kinds of shortcoming we apologize for. Chet, which is the kind that we don't intend, we're not conscious of. Avon, the kind that we take shortcuts for benefit. And then Pesha. They're just ways in which we act because we don't want to be doing what the tradition or others tell us to do because we have to do what we want to do or do it ourselves. And so I feel like there's been no way this year not to do lots and lots of shortcomings that are unintentional, because it seems like so often there's no way to do the right thing. And there's no matter how many steps you take, it's going to come out wrong. And so this is part of what I wrote in the tradition of green eggs and ham. Do you want that on the phone? Do you want that from home? Do you want it in a park? Do you want it in person but distanced far? Do you want it on a walk? Do you want to wear a mask when we talk? Do you want everyone on mute? Or does letting everyone jump in better suit? Do you want it in a tent? Do you want it by event? Or even better, electronically sent? Do you want it in a bag? I haven't heard back, I'm sorry to nag. Do you want it left by your door? Or is what you want something more? Do you want it on Zoom? Or do you want it in the room? I feel like this year, as we cry out to God for a little mercy and a little help and a little change in the positive direction, let us acknowledge that so much of what we're trying to do, even when it doesn't come out right, is from the desire to please and the desire to serve. 233. Pardon me. I call up our ark opener on 233. Please rise.
Shema Koleinu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chutz v'rachem aleinu, v'kaber v'rachamim v'ratzonet v'hiladeinu.
Shema Kolenu, Aleinu, V'rachem Aleinu, V'kaber v'rachamim v'ratzonet
Hachivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Ameinu Kekedem.
Hashivenu Adonai Lecha v'nashuva Chadesh Amenu Kekedem.
תשליכנו מלפניך, ורוח קודשך אל תיקח ממנו.
אל תשליכנו מלפניך ורוח קודשך אל תיקח ממנו.
אל תשליכנו לעת זקנה, כי כלות אורחנו, אל תעזבנו.
אל תשליכנו לעת זקנה, כי כלות אורחנו, אל תעזבנו. Do not abandon us, O our God. Do not distance yourself from us. Give us a signal of hope.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, אל תעזבנו עד תשארנו, אל תחרימנו ואל תפר בך איתנו. קרבנו לתורתך, למדנו מצוותיך, הורינו דרכך, עד ליבנו ירא את שמך. בול את לבבנו לעבודתך, ונשוב אליך באמת ובלב שלם, למען שמך הגדול תמחה ותסלח לעווננו. הכתוב בדברי קודשך, למען שמך אדוני וסלחת לעווני, כי רבו.
234.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו.
We're seated.
כי אנו עמך ואתה אלוהינו, אנו בניך ואתה אבינו, אנו עבדיך ואתה אדוננו, אנו כעבדך ואתה חלקנו, אנו נחלתך ואתה גורלנו, אנו צאנך ואתה רוענו, אנו חרמך ואתה נוזרנו, אנו פולתך ואתה יוצרנו, אנו רעייתך ואתה דודנו, אנו סגולתך ואתה קרובנו, אנו עמך ואתה מלכנו, אנו ממירך ואתה ממירנו. אנו עזי פנים ואתה רחום וחנון, אנו קשיר ואתה ערך אפיים, אנו מלא עוון ואתה מלא רחמים, אנו ימינו כצל עובר ואתה ושנותיך לא יתמו. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, תבוא לפניך תפילתנו ותתעלה מתחילתנו, שאנחנו עזי פנים כשעורף לומר לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהינו, צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו, אבל אנחנו ואבותינו חטאנו.
Please rise, 235.
Ay, 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 Ashamanu, Baganu, Kazanu, Dibanu, Dofi, ay, 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 Evinu, Vehirshanu, Zanu, Hamasnu, Tafanu, Sheker, ay, 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 Yasnuran, Kizavnu, Latsnu, Maradnu, Niasnu, Sararnu, Avinu, Pashanu, Tsararnu, Kishinu, Orev, ay, 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 Rashanu, Shikanu, Tiavnu, Tahinu, Tihitanu.
You may be seated.
Sanu mitzvotach mimishtatech hatovim lo shavalanu, v'ata tzadik o kol haba aleinu, ki em ata sita v'anachnu yishanu. Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu, stop chavlav martev yom kippurim hazeh, mechev aver f'sheinu v'katatenu mineh genenecha v'kof et yitzrat, Leinu yishtabed lach, v'chna rapenu l'shuv elecha, v'gadesh kiryoteinu l'shmohar pigodecha, v'mol levavenu v'lava yura et shmecha katuv b'toratecha, v'mol Adonai l'hecha l'vavcha v'et levav zarecha, lava et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha l'man chayecha.
We're preparing for the Al-Chet, which will be on 237. You know, often we think, I already mentioned earlier, it implies how interwoven we are and the power of words, sometimes not ours, but to take responsibility for being in a community, always being in community, and that words affect others, so we apologize for things that we may not have done ourselves. But one additional thought, sometimes people find this all very negative, like we're all so stained with such problems. But when I read each of the negative things we're capable of, what I think in my heart is what the opposite is, and how amazingly blessed we are with the possibility of not doing those things, and the great possibilities each of us have to do the opposite. You know the mysteries of the universe, Adonai, the deepest secrets of everyone alive. You probe our innermost depths. You examine our thoughts and feelings. Nothing escapes you. Nothing is secret from you. May I be your partner in doing so, and therefore may it be your will to give us all of our shortcomings, to pardon us for all of our intentional iniquities for benefit, and to grant us atonement for all the ways we have resisted authority just for the sake of doing so. Please rise at the top of 237.
Al chet shekatan lefanecha ba'ones v'ratzon, v'al chet shekatan lefanecha b'imutz halev, al chet shekatan lefanecha b'vli dat, v'al chet shekatan lefanecha b'vitui sfatayim, al chet shekatan lefanecha b'gilui arayot, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך בגלוי ובסתר, על חטא שקטן לפניך בדעת ובמרמה, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך בדיבור פנים.
We have sinned against you knowingly and deceitfully, and sinned against you by the way we talk. We have sinned against you by scorning parents and scorning teachers, and we have sinned against you purposely and by mistake.
על חטא שקטן לפניך ביצר הרע, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך ביודעים ולא יודעים, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כבר לנו. על חטא שקטן לפניך בכחש ובכזב, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך בכפת שוחד, על חטא שקטן לפניך ולצון, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך דושון הרע.
We have sinned against you by the way we do business, sinned against you in our eating and in our drinking. We have sinned against you by greed and oppressive interest, and sinned against you through arrogance. We have sinned against you in everyday conversation. We have sinned against you through conspiratorial glances. We have sinned against you through condescension. We have sinned against you through stubbornness.
על חטא שקטן לפניך בעיניים רמות, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך בעזות מצח, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו. על חטא שקטן לפניך בפרי קרוב, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך בפלילות.
We have sinned against you through superficiality and against you through stubbornness. We have sinned against you by rushing to do evil, and we have sinned against you through gossip. We have sinned against you through empty promises, sinned against you through causeless hatred. We have sinned against you by betraying trust, and we have sinned against you by succumbing to confusion.
על חטא שקטן לפניך בתשומת יד, ועל חטא שקטן לפניך בתימהון לבב, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו.
We may be seated. The first psalm from the Book of Mercy, a collection of psalms by Leonard Cohen. I stopped to listen, but he did not come. I began again with a sense of loss. As this sense deepened, I heard him again. So I stopped stopping, and I stopped starting, and I allowed myself to be crushed by ignorance. This was a strategy, and it didn't work at all. Much time, my years were wasted in a minor mode. So now I bargain. I offer buttons for God's love. I beg for mercy. And slowly, he yields. Haltingly, he moves toward his throne. Reluctantly, the angels grant to one another permission to sing. In a transition so delicate it cannot be marked, the court is established on beams of golden symmetry. And once again, I am a singer in the lower choirs, born 50 years ago to raise my voice this high, if no higher. We continue the service. Actually, what I'm going to ask you to do is let your eye glance over the offered readings on 240, 241, and 242. Just pick a page and let your eye settle on one of the parts. And pretend for a moment that you wrote it. Maybe you wrote it when you were an adolescent. Maybe you wrote it 10 years ago. Maybe you're going to write it in 5 years. But pretend whatever your eye lights on, you wrote it. And you're trying to figure out why you wrote it and what it can mean to you now. If you have the honor of opening the Ark on 243, please take your place by the curtain now. Please rise.
Avinu Malkeinu chatan lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu ein lanu melech ela ata. Avinu Malkeinu aseh imanu leman shmecha. Avinu Malkeinu chadesh aleinu shana tova.
Avinu Malkeinu batel Avinu ki kazerut kashor.
Avinu Malkeinu chachazirenu b'tshua shlema lefanecha.
Avinu Malkeinu chazirenu b'tshua shlema
Avinu
lefanecha.
Malkeinu shlach rufua shlema lecholei amecha.
Avinu Malkeinu shlach rufua shlema lecholei amecha.
Avinu Malkeinu zochrenu b'zikaron tov lefanecha.
Avinu Malkeinu zochrenu b'zikaron tov.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer chayim tovim.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer chayim tovim.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer geula v'yeshua.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer geula v'yeshua.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer parnasa
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu
v'chakala.
b'sefer parnasa v'chakala.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer
Avinu Malkeinu
shkuyot.
kotvenu b'sefer zechuyot.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer tzlicha u'mechila.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer slicha mechila. Avinu Malkeinu, cause our salvation to flourish soon. Avinu Malkeinu, cause your people Israel to be exalted. Avinu Malkeinu, raise up your anointed with strength. Avinu Malkeinu, hear our voice, be kind, and sympathize with us. Avinu Malkeinu, accept our prayer willingly and lovingly. Avinu Malkeinu, do not turn us away empty-handed. Avinu Malkeinu, remember that we are but dust. Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion for us, for our infants, for our children. Avinu Malkeinu, do this for the sake of those who are martyred for your holy name. Avinu Malkeinu, do this for the sake of those who were slaughtered for their exclusive devotion to you. Avinu Malkeinu, do this for the sake of those who went through fire and water to sanctify your name. Together with me, Avinu Malkeinu, do this for your sake, if not for ours. 244.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu Vaneinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu Vanenu, Ki Ein Banu Maasim. Aseh Imanu, Tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh Imanu, Tzedakah v'chesed, V'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Hanenu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Hanenu Vaneinu, Yevanu Masim. Aseh Imanu, Tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh Imanu, Tzedakah v'chesed, V'hoshienu.
We may be seated. Tonight, we stand together as a community, not as individuals. And I feel very fortunate to be able to call up Deborah Ball at this time, the president of our congregation.
Shana Tova. Over the past few weeks, my mother and I have immersed ourselves in Psalm 27, the psalm traditionally read during the month of Elul and throughout these holy days and the festival ahead. It's a beautiful psalm, and it brings meanings and questions that I've newly appreciated this year as I've studied with my mother. I'd like to begin by reading 2 verses from this psalm, beginning with verse 4. One thing I have sought from Adonai, how I long for it, that I may live in the house of Adonai all the days of my life, that I may look upon the sweetness of Adonai and spend time in the palace, that you may hide me in your sukkah on a chaotic day, hide me in the hiding places of your tent, raise me high upon a rock. I keep returning to these verses to ask myself, what does it mean to live in the house of Adonai? And I keep thinking of this notion of a chaotic day. There have been many in the last year. And then I reflect on the gift of being sheltered and lifted up safely above the chaos, the fear, the grief, the unpredictability of life. These verses and their powerful metaphors have brought me to contemplate and connect a set of thoughts about us that I want to share with you tonight. Have you ever thought directly about the name of our congregation, Beth Israel, Beit Yisrael, House of Israel? I've been thinking about what it means to be a house of Israel. During this past year and a half, we have only a few times, and at that, just some of us, been in this building we call Beth Israel. Tonight, many more of us are participating from home than are here in this sanctuary. And yet, one of the lessons of the pandemic is that the place does not define who we are. Just as Mount Sinai, the place of the giving of the 10 Commandments, wasn't holy, neither do we Jews regard formal temples as our only sanctuaries. The quest to be holy, to live into our unique possibilities as humans, demands more of us than to be in any particular place. Tonight and tomorrow are devoted to our contemplations on our lives over the past year, to reflect on where we have fallen short, where we may have missed the mark, but also where we have succeeded and grown. But this day is also about our tomorrows that lie ahead. Tonight, I ask that we think about these questions as a community as well. So who and what are we, and who will we be, Beit Israel, Beth Israel? I offer 3 interlocking and yet distinct answers to this question, and I ask you to join me and the board in taking this question seriously in the coming year. I ask you to bring to it your imagination, your desires, your sense of possibilities, and your spirit. Who and what we are, who and what we will be, is more than a casual question. It emanates from an urgent need. My 3 answers to this question center on a trio of related notions: B'nai Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and Beit Israel. And I anchor all of this in the notions of sacred space, sacred time, and sacred deeds, 3 ways in which our tradition structures the quest for holiness. You might be able to tell I like 3s. In Jewish tradition, sacred space can be created anywhere. As individuals, we can find and be in these spaces, spaces that matter to us, spaces in which we experience closeness to the infinite, spaces where we can meditate, spaces where we feel spirituality and gratitude and love. We might experience sacred times on a mountaintop, at a beautiful sunset in a quiet room, or on a busy street corner. We are, as we engage in these ways, B'nai Yisrael, or children of Israel. We are individually members of a remarkable tradition that invites and honors our own interpretations and our own searches for meaning. In this sense, though, we are also Am Yisrael, the people Israel. We are part of a collective that spans millennia. Whether we're on Zoom or in this building, we are more than just disparate individuals. Being with others is a central core of our tradition. This can be seen, for example, in our customs of mourning, where the rituals are explicitly designed to bring the mourner into regular contact with others. It can be seen in our tradition of a Minion, where some of our most important prayers can only be recited aloud in the company of at least 9 others. It can be seen in our strong emphasis on tzedakah, on giving to others, and on tikkun olam, on social action in our world. We are rooted in Torah and the commentaries and learnings of so many others, our people, our rabbis and sages, teachers and parents. Preserving and nourishing our traditions is more than any one of us can do alone. And thus, we are also Beit Yisrael, a house of Israel. Beth Israel is, of course, this beautiful space and the time we spend here. I've heard more than one of our rabbis say how deeply moved they were when they first stepped inside this physical sanctuary with the skylight and the windows onto the world outside, trees, the squirrels. But if there is a lesson from the last year and a half, it is this. As a sacred space, as a community, we are an idea planted in the dreams of those who came before us. This idea represents more than us as individuals, more than us as members of a people. Beit Yisrael is an institutional concept. Founded over 100 years ago, this congregation represents a vision of what could be possible here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Beit Yisrael is inherently a commitment to the continuity of conservative Judaism and Jewish community here. But this institutional concept of Beth Israel, or Beit Israel, is also a fragile one. While it grounds us, it can't ever be taken for granted. It's precarious. There are obvious precarities. Our roof might need repairs. I think we actually took care of that already, but our refrigerator might go out. We might have to call people to make a Minion. We might forget to honor someone or fail to recognize a sacred moment. But there are more serious threats to the promise of Beit Israel. And these threats are also met by our power as a Beit Israel. Let me offer 3 examples of our fragility and point to our strengths together to withstand forces that threaten us. We are precarious because, once again, the rise of anti-Semitism casts shadows of fear over us. But as a collective, we do have the wisdom and experience to resist and to thrive. We're also precarious because we have a budget that's not in balance. We lack the revenue to sustain our basic needs. But as a congregation, we do have the wherewithal to come together and to tackle this, to design and enact a budget that will sustain our house. And we're also precarious because we sometimes tilt toward our individual preferences and priorities over those of ours that are collective. But in this matter, too, we do have the strength to confront this in ways that will broaden and deepen us. But being able to do these things asks hard and more things of us. Being a house of Israel is a concept rooted in continuity, looking both backward and ahead. It's about memory and learning. It's about the humility to recognize our shortcomings as a community, and it's about the disposition to appreciate our unusual diversity and strengths among us, and to know and appreciate our history. It's about our resilience here, our spirit and our potential. It is about our successes and our learning. So what are some of our successes and our learning? The past months have helped us learn again that Beth Israel is more than this house. It's remarkable what we've done together. We must not leave invisible the devoted work and imaginative innovation that Rabbi Kane and our small but dedicated and incredible staff have devoted to our house. Thank you. We are blessed by their dedication and tireless commitment and labor. We also must not overlook or take for granted the hours of labor and love by so many of you. We've had sustaining and comforting occasions and opportunities. We've invented them together, we've supported one another, and we've cared. For so many obvious and less obvious reasons, this time has not been easy. But we have strength, and we have resilience, and we have more together than we could possibly have each on our own. In this moment, I call upon us to look back across this time and turn our eyes and hearts forward. Over the coming months, it is time to think deeply and consciously into our present and outward toward our future. This is no less than sacred work. We must think deliberately and intentionally about what it will take to add our dreams to the dreams of those who came before us, those who created this house, our Beth Israel, our Beit Israel. We must identify and pursue our aspirations to create, to make, and to build this house, not only for ourselves or even for the current generation of children, but also for those who will come long after us here. The board has been working on envisioning our house, our Beth Israel, for our future and how to make that possible. With a horizon of just 5 years or 10, how would you collectively reimagine who and what we could be, what we should try to be, and to look hard at what that will require of us? To those of you who have made commitments to life and legacy, you are already answering this call. Thank you. We're deeply grateful for your leadership. To those of you who give your time as tireless volunteers, you're answering this call too, and we appreciate you deeply. To those who care for other members, who reach out, who honor one another with contributions, who comfort one another during difficult times, who reach out to the alone and the lonely, to the ill, and sometimes just because you care, you also are delivering vital resources to the concept of our Beit Israel. But to put in view the Beth Israel of 1854 or 100 years from now, we will need more from ourselves, more from each of us, and more from us together. It will call on us not just as children of Israel, B'nai Israel, not just as individual Jews, each with our own histories and our ways of being. It will call upon us not just as Am Yisrael, members of a people brought together here in Ann Arbor and connected to Jews across the country and across the globe. This work will call upon us as inhabitants of this house of Israel, committed to its possibilities and its promise. As we stand before the unknowable majesty of the gift of our lives, as we enter the threshold of this new year, let this be a year in which we rise to this challenge of our future together. Please look forward to this fall and these next months, to the call to our future, to the Beth Israel not just of 5782, but of 5800 and beyond. May you each be inscribed for a healthy and healing year ahead, and for renewal of spirit and body. And as we begin to roll out how we must stand together as we cross into our future here at Beth Israel, I ask that each of you join hand in hand with generosity and optimism, contributing all you are and all you can for the continuity of our very special Beth Israel here in Ann Arbor, now and into the years ahead. Gemar Chatima Tova.
Shana Tova. I'd like to reflect a little bit more on what it means to be a Beit Yisrael, a house of Israel. Always leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're reading through the book of Deuteronomy, and we're about to end it in short order, and then we'll have Simchat Torah. And one of the tensions that arise, the productive tensions that arises in the book, is the loss that goes with closing down the local altar sites, as the book focuses on the centralization in a single temple rather than in multiple altar sites going on. The tension between where one is a Jew and how one is a Jew in the awareness of it, actually, when you start to look for it, it's all over the Torah. A simple example, many biblical scholars point out, Dr. Benjamin Sommer among them, JTS, we're commanded on Sukkot to live in our Sukkot for the full duration of the holiday, out with our harvest, protecting it, keeping it from being stolen, and connecting to God through staying out in the fields, as we are also commanded to go to the temple in Jerusalem and spend at least part of the duration of the holiday there with our offerings. As scholars point out, can't be in two places at once. There's a beauty in the centralization of the temple in Jerusalem in Deuteronomy, and something else is given up. At the local altar sites, people, if you ever wanted to eat meat from a domesticated animal, you'd have to have you slaughter it publicly and share it with those who serve the community and with the poor before taking the portion of it that belonged to you home and sharing it with the people that you invited. And that is lost when things are located in only one place. As Deuteronomy says, when it becomes too far to reach, you can just do shechita, you can just slaughter, and don't worry about the sharing. People look to halakha for certainty in troubled times. But actually, halakha too often manifests as the product of creative tensions. It often doesn't give the certainty we seek, but is revelatory when one looks close. And I'd like to share a little bit with you tonight. I wouldn't do it tomorrow when we're all well into the fast because halakha is too hard to follow. But I know you're all fresh, so here we go. I've been reflecting on what it's been like to be a community when we're not physically together. How has that felt? How has it been productive? Can we do a cheshbon nefesh of it? Can we look back as a community on our year and take a reckoning and accounting of how we got through it, what it felt like, what we want to keep and take into the future, and what we are happy to leave in our past? So what does halakha say about making a minyan? I thought it was pretty simple because I remembered reading in the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim 55, the 10 who constitute the minyan must be in one place, one geographical place, and the leader with them. Simple, except for the next line. If a person is standing outside the synagogue and there is a window, even if it is several stories high and smaller than 4 cubits or 6 feet wide, always interesting that 6 feet seem to be the distancing level, and that's the classic 4 cubits of halakha. If that person shows their face in the window, they may be counted. And if a few of the potential minyan, this is the next line, are inside and a few are outside, if the leader positions themselves in the entrance, then he connects them to form one minyan. So of course, I understood and was tested on the fact that this is clearly about physical location. One has to be in one room. I know that you don't count the people in the hallway. You don't count people who aren't paying attention just because you want to get to 10, but you know they're talking about something else, and all of that is elaborated on. But the principles are clear even within the halakha itself. The Tosafot on Pesachim 85b, in the name of Rabbeinu Yitzchak, summarize many of the positions going on about what the business with the window is. And they conclude that there are many cases in which you fulfill your obligations through listening. So you can do Birkat HaMazon and make 3 if the person's all the way down the street and you're yelling the Birkat, we forgot the Zimun together, Birkat HaMazon, and they're like, yeah, Chavara Nevarech, you're all good. You can hear the shofar from a distance walking by a building by accident. You can hear the Megillah reading. So as Rabbeinu Yitzchak expresses, the Tosafot codifies, if there is a physical minyan, you certainly can count people outside the physical space if they can hear and the leader can hear them and they can fulfill their obligations like saying the Kaddish. Whoever knew or imagined in the medieval, late medieval, early modern legal code of the Shulchan Aruch that windows, seeing people visually, knowing that unlike the 2 people in the hallway that are talking about something else and you can't count, these people outside the window are intending to daven with you. They're intending to fulfill their obligations and they want to be with you. And so in the tshuva that has been published by the conservative movement and passed by a large majority, it is clear that, or it is stated as an acceptable position, that if a physical minyan is constituted in a place, those who are joining by the windows of virtual technology of Zoom, if they can be seen and heard, maybe even just heard, because that's the law, but let's just say seen and heard in 2-way communication, they can fulfill their obligations in the minyan like saying Kaddish. And the tshuva raises the question, but doesn't answer, one that has recently been published just a year ago by Rabbi Josh Heller. Maybe we need to think a little bit more about those windows. Maybe we could constitute a minyan without the physical space, using the principles of halakha. In the 2001 tshuva, 2001, written by Rabbi Avram Reisner and also passed by a large majority in the CJLS, says, when the rabbis moved to require a quorum for communal public prayers and banned response absent a quorum, what they were really doing is trying to force the community to come together, because otherwise one could fulfill all of their obligations alone. And they feared that the public communal structures would not develop. Still, almost everything can be done alone. And so they didn't go too far with it. They reserved what they called public praise, meaning the Baruch Hu and the Kedusha, which we were not doing by Zoom. They reserved those two for the physical minyan, thus validating most of everything else. And the Kaddish is actually a bit different because it's not in the category of public praise. And so therefore, one can fulfill their obligation by attaching electronically. Rabbi Reisner writes, the halacha as written seems to demand that togetherness be physical and tactile, but I could well imagine a definition of togetherness that was only auditory or visual. Indeed, the technology to cast our auditory and visual imprint far and wide did not exist in the reality that faced the rabbis. Is it possible to imagine community based only on remote contact? People might well answer that question differently, and on a fundamental level, whether to go beyond the book halacha or not will be predicated on one's answer to that question. And that was written over 20 years ago. We owe it to our denomination as halachic to avoid pronouncements about what halacha must dictate without informing ourselves of what halacha manifests. In 2012, Rabbi Daniel Nevins submitted the 79-page tshuva, many tshuvot are only 2 or 3 pages, on the use of electrical and electronic devices on Shabbat. And the tshuva showed us, it was passed by 17-2 and 2 abstaining. It showed us what many of us already knew. The categories of workmanship, of milacha, prohibited on Shabbat in the Torah, many of them based on agriculture and building, do not apply to electricity. Feeble attempts at doing so over the past centuries by Orthodox decisors have been shown to be problematic by other Orthodox decisors. One is not completing this building of a circuit by flipping a switch any more than one's completing a wall or a room by closing a door, or completing their plumbing by turning on the faucet. And the most common argument that electricity is fire is problematic. The argument that sparks are flying through wires is not true by the laws of physics nor by common sense. And electricity does not cause filaments or wires to be consumed, which is a halachic requirement of fire. Nor does flipping a switch cause the burning of fossil fuels at a distance. Power plants produce capacity whether you flip your switch or not, and one is permitted to benefit from municipal fire production. Some have argued that electronic devices write to their screens or to their memory caches or hard drives, but temporary writing is permitted as long as it does not endure. One can write in the sand and build sandcastles. One can tie a shoelace, knowing that in the regular course of things it may become untied or it will become untied. Though, of course, one cannot tie a sailor's knot. A cache overwriting itself is not enduring. And this is not to say that the use of electronic appliances is totally fine. You cannot violate other prohibitions just because your appliance runs on electricity. You can't cook on Shabbat using an electric oven. You can't mow your lawn using an electric lawnmower. But electricity itself leaves no physical change on the environment, unlike fire and other forbidden types of workmanship. And this is very important to understand, because one might say one is just looking at an excuse to hurt the tradition. But often I find that that argument is made without reading the tradition. And I have always viewed the openings within the tradition as invitations for investigation, just as the words of the Torah are open to investigation. And without it, one's not listening. One question about streaming has to do with recording, because you're making a creation if you use YouTube. But as the tshuva says, even if we assume that recording is writing, which I think it is permissible to benefit after Shabbat from labor done on Shabbat as long as it was not done by a Jewish person, and as long as one waits long enough after Shabbat for the work to be done. In other words, it is halakhically permissible to have a Shabbat non-Jew in the normal course of their duties, flip a switch to stream and record a service, as we've been doing at Beth Israel since we resumed in-person services. But the problem with electricity and halakha is a category unique to Shabbat, and it's real. It's not a violation of a prohibition that you can identify. It's the special category of Shavut. We are commanded to rest. We are commanded to cultivate restfulness and an atmosphere of restfulness. The question of whether electricity should be prohibited or in principle permitted can only be answered, the tshuva tells us, by our searching our souls and answering whether a community that uses electricity is conducive to the spirit of Shabbat, the Shavut that we are cultivating. Other things that communities have to decide about is whether reading books for class is permissible on Shabbat. Many decisors, our da'atras, say you can't do your homework on Shabbat, even if it's just reading that psych textbook that you were assigned. I've had a very different experience in my life. I think one of the reasons I embrace the humanities as spiritual, as a process of self and community building, is because I used to read my assignments on Shabbat when I couldn't take notes, I couldn't highlight, and I couldn't write anything down. And then I realized there's a reason teachers are assigning these things to me, because when you sit with them and you read them, they're beautiful by themselves. Other categories that people prohibit, reading a newspaper. It'll just bring in the wrong spirit on Shabbat. That I kind of agree with. That disturbs my Shabbat rest. Window shopping. Actually, the whole issue of music really comes down to Shavut as well. It's not so much the playing of the instrument, but whether it disturbs the peace. And a community in its Mar Da'atra, the local rabbinic decisor, can decide to prohibit anything they deem contrary to the cultivation of the spirit of Shabbat. In other words, halakha won't get us out of this question. It is permitted in a conservative synagogue to use electricity. The question is whether it changes the character of the community for the worse. It's not appropriate to say, well, I'm no expert on halakha, but having a camera streaming the service is a clear violation of halakha, because it isn't. And it's too easy an answer for the real work we have to do, which is of the technologies that we've adopted. What does it mean to be a community? How can we make a community? And are the choices that we make conducive to creating holy community, or are they not? We can't avoid the work in our lives or halachically by making assumptions. That is real cheshbon nefesh. It's real figuring out who we want to be. It's spiritually demanding work. It imposes on our time. And asking Alexa or Siri, Google won't give you the answer. God help the person who turns to the internet to ask the question. You'll get lots of answers. I really appreciate the words of Rabbi Josh Heller in the tshuva passed 19-3 with 3 abstentions on May 13, 2020. He writes this: when we stream the surface and allow Zoom, do we change what we're doing from a service to putting on a show? Will we be tempted to play to the cameras? Will large synagogues with deeper pockets be capable of production values smaller congregations can only dream about, hastening their departure? Will streaming encourage the breakdown of local Jewish communities as Jews tune into communities far away with inspiring, charismatic celebrity rabbis? Will streaming harm attendance at synagogue and detract from the making of community? Will streaming encourage laziness of those who don't wish to have to travel to synagogue? And will electricity itself, are we destroying the ember of Shabbat holiness that has been bequeathed to us as our inheritance? One of the questions we need to ask is how much of this is fear and prediction? Fear of the future is not really part of cheshbon nefesh, taking an accounting to know what to do in the future. An honest appraisal of oneself and one community is. So I want to share what I think a little bit of that appraisal looks like. I know for some, it is right down to their kishkas that we are destroying the inheritance of Judaism and Shabbat if we consider continuing streaming services into the future. They have told me to my face, I hope you're happy putting on a show. I can see you're enjoying your toys. For the record, I've enjoyed none of it. I've done my very best to swallow my immense sense of imperfection and inadequacy in serving the congregation during the pandemic, and to use whatever means to fulfill the Mishnah Avot's exhortation to try to greet others with a cheerful countenance. And that's what I've tried to do. It's not been fun for me to spend my hours teaching myself how to use broadcasting software or learning about the technologies of cameras. I know for some, the word davening can only apply to hearing the music of those joining in with you. I know what they mean. With no offense to any of your voices, I tend to hear the sanctuary as a group of frogs joining in chorus at the pond. Because for 10 years, I lived in a cabin on 300 empty acres in the woods with a pond next door. And listening to those frogs joining together and making Minion, there was nothing like it. It's an amazing experience of Earth coming alive with song, and I don't think one hears that chorus if the frogs were zooming into the pond. I know for many in our community, there's no way to separate the deep sense of loss and isolation they've experienced from trying virtual services and finding that that experience, far from relieving their sense of isolation and hopelessness, very much compounded it. To suggest their continuation after COVID is like suggesting reliving the woundedness. And there's the accounting on the other side of the ledger. We have 440 member units. How many come to synagogue? As one wrote me, "You know, Rabbi, I left off coming to synagogue many decades ago, though I'm fully invested in Pesach, Hanukkah, and I make Shabbat dinner at home. But honestly, I don't know Hebrew, and a lot of the Hebrew prayers, well, it just hasn't put me in a spiritual space, as deep as I get with other modalities from walks to books. But my husband and I started to put on the service on Saturday morning while we sit around the house and make lunch. And hearing the prayers, and especially the sermon, it has become our Shabbat ritual. I never would have thought the Saturday morning service would be a part of my future. And here we are." From someone else. "I have small children. I actually love coming to synagogue, but they don't. And honestly, we like the Friday evening service the best, and bedtime and feeding them takes precedence. And now we listen to the service while we make challah and eat dinner. And sometimes I catch my kids singing the prayers to themselves during the week." Another. "When my mom died, I couldn't attend Minion every day at Beth Israel. I just can't get there at 7:30 every day given my life responsibilities and work. When I went, it was beautiful. There's nothing like having people there knowing why you're there and feeling their support and presence. But this year, I've been able to say Kaddish every day, and I can't tell you how meaningful that has been. Is there any way you can continue allowing Zoom Minion so I can attend in person when I can, but also participate when I can't?" Another. "At Shiva, people showed up from around the world. Family and friends came from Israel. Colleagues, friends, disciples from around the country. To see the influence, the blessings that my parent left on the world was deeply comforting." And finally, I'm calling out Beth Israel's newest member, okay? Friday night services a couple weeks ago, someone came up to me, we are already friends, said, "Rav Nadav, I'm proud to be Beth Israel's newest member." I said, "Welcome to the community." And they said, "Well, I need to tell you, you're my fourth membership." I'm going to give them grief about this forever. During the pandemic, I've joined eCar and Six and I online, but you're still important to me. Rabbi Mike Urim, executive director of Hillel at the University of Pennsylvania and author of Next Generation Judaism, says, "Look, I'm 41 years old. When I was in college, we all got together in the dorm lounge and watched Friends and Seinfeld before we went out to parties on Thursday nights. But no one in college is getting together to watch TV now other than sports. But they're watching the same shows, but not in the same room. They're streaming them on their phones or on their laptops. They binge watch because they binge watch, they're out of sync with each other. If legacy institutions can't provide Jewish content to two generations of Jews who want to bring more Judaism into their lives, but in the way they receive their content, then I don't know where those institutions will be, although I do think that's fear. One can say negative things about what they want, what these generations want, and how they receive their friendships and their content and their politics and their community, but research has shown that millennials want to be co-creators in their experiences and in what they consume. They want to feel like it's just for them. To say that we won't provide a way for them to experience Judaism like they experience everything else. It's like saying we can't print books, but one must learn from one-to-one interaction. before I conclude, a serious one. Rabbi, you don't know me. These are all true, right? We haven't come in probably 10 years, when my husband was confined to a wheelchair. We'd come sometimes anyway, and people would make a place for the chair, but then it would block the Torah procession. And honestly, it was hard to get in and out of the car. And so you've never met us. But this year, we've been streaming the service, and we feel like we know you, and we feel connected. And that's why I feel comfortable reaching out to you at this very difficult time. And from someone many of us know, this was from 5 weeks ago. Rabbi, I'm calling you because I need to tell you that I can't come in person. I haven't been able to come in person for some time, given my physical condition. And now I'm entering hospice. Being able to stream the service has been a lifeline for me. I see old friends from Beth Israel show up. I hear the melodies I grew up with. It's made me feel in love with Beth Israel again. I may not be around to see it, but I hope it continues. I'm reminded that evil in the Torah and the Jewish tradition is identified as the tribe of Amalek, who attacked the stragglers of the Jewish people as we left Egypt, the young who couldn't keep up, the old and infirm who couldn't keep up. And the rabbis raised the question in the Midrash, why did those who were strong in front not remember to stay back with the stragglers and protect them too? Why were not they remembered? As Rabbi Heller says in his tshuva, technological means can be a way of enhancing human safety and dignity. It is just as likely that for every person who sees streaming as an easy out and chooses not to attend a service in person, there's someone else who might otherwise skip prayer altogether, or who would view an alternate service lacking the basic components of the liturgy. A study of the music industry, and this is in the tshuva, pointed out that now as artists are forced to give away their content for free, they have found that audiences willing to show up to hear them in person have increased. So it is not necessarily triggered absence, but presence. As a community, I strongly sense we are polarized on what we've learned from streaming services this year. I know for some, the idea of even continuing the stream and what that would mean, which we haven't done yet, is basically hiding the cameras. One of the reasons we haven't done it yet is because I want it, when it's done, even if it's temporary, I want it done right, because I'm a perfectionist. And I don't want to notice it. So what I want is it to be hidden up there, and we've already had some ideas of how to accomplish that, and so that we forget about it like we forget about the lights here for the fires, the emergency lights. And that we don't need to play to the camera. And that it's seamless for the people who are here. But for others, there's no way to separate how connected it has made them feel. There's always a danger, says halakha, that what gets permitted for one reason will get permitted over all. But maybe this has taught us a way to be more inclusive. Does technology destroy Shabbat? It certainly can. Or is halakha maybe trying to show us it's not the technology that's forbidden. It's whether you're truly using it in the service of God, and whether you're willing to be judged before the Holy One, not before others who have an opinion, in the life that we're creating. And maybe there's a way to continue it in which we find that even those outside the temple walls are hearing our voices, words of Torah and connection. We are accustomed to feel that each of us knows what's best for our community, and but community doesn't happen by adding up and weighing voices. Just as our own cheshbon nefesh, our own deciding which oaths and changes we wish to make in our lives, that's not done just by sifting what is logical and weighing others' recommendations. Logic comes to an end, and moral imagination comes to the fore. Tshuva is an act of creation. Who do we want to be, individually and collectively? Where are our windows? Are we seeing everyone, Are we inviting them to see us? How can we be a house of Israel? Shana Tova. Page 245.
Yitkadal v'yikadav shmei Rabbah Yalma divrach yirutei v'yamelech malchutei b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayedecha beit Yisrael b'gala v'vimankariv v'yimru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach Olam olamei hamaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpor v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitala Shemei the Richu Leila min kol berchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran beyoma Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran beyoma v'yimru Amen. Titkabel salozon uva'ozon decha Yisrael Dam uvuhon divishmaya v'yimru Amen. Yesh tamaraba mishemaya v'chayim Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Ose shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol v'tekir l'yotzer reshit shelo asanu kegogei ha'aratzot v'lo hasamanu k'mishpachot ha'adama shelo sam chalkeinu kayam v'gohor aleinu k'kol hamonam v'nachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ ומשה יקרו בשמיים עמו ושכינתו זו בגבהי מרומים ואלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס ולטו ככתוב בתורתו ידעת היום והשבות אל לבבך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחתנו ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו Ushemo Echad.
We may be seated. We turn to page 248 before turning back for the Mourner's Kaddish. Deborah had mentioned Psalm 27 earlier. I ask you to sort of read it to yourself and find yourself in its words as Neil also sings.
Achad shoalti me'et Adonai o tavakesh. Achad shoalti me'et Adonai o tavakesh. Shivti b'veit Adonai kol yemei chayai. Lachazod ben Noam Adonai u'levaker v'echalo. Lachazod ben Noam Adonai u'levaker v'echalo. Loi hemanti lerot betuva naberet chayim kaveh Adonai chazak misibecha v'kaveh el Adonai.
Mourner's Kaddish, page 247 for those reciting. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabba v'yalma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam u'lamei almaya Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha brichu le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yakol yoshvei tevel, v'imru,
Amen.
amen. For our closing song, I want to remind you that immediately following the service, there is a Zoom link on our website with the usual password for Sandy Finkel, leading meditation to help us continue that process of moving inward and finding our better selves and bringing them to the fore. So Sandy Finkel's meditation follows the service by Zoom. Tomorrow morning, we'll be starting at 9 a.m. And I also want to remind you that taking medication, if you're allowing me to be your Mar D'Atra, is not a violation of fasting. It's not food, it's medication. And for those who have a difficult time fasting, you'll know what I say each year, which is, it is a misdemeanor rather than a felony to have one gulpful, as much as you can get in there, of liquid, or one gulpful, mouthful, I should say cheekful, one double cheekful of food. But you can have no more than one time per hour, and preferably less. But the beauty of the misdemeanor is that it doesn't interrupt the holiness of the day. If you're hypoglycemic or you're easily dehydrated or you're just super distracted by the fast, the idea that you're not like, okay, now I'm breaking it and I'm going to go have a meal, but that you basically have one mouthful of banana, I'm sorry I said it, but I had to give an example, or a mouthful of water or Gatorade. If that's what keeps you going for a couple more hours, then you're in misdemeanor territory. And remember all the other prohibitions at this time, and I look forward to continuing the service at 9 a.m. in the morning. And Neil has chosen Yigdal. I forgot that I always give a quick blessing at this time. Mine comes from Rabbi Avi Weiss. We have loved a reverse Ashamnu. In addition to all the chaitz, we have loved. We have blessed. We have grown. We have spoken positively. We have raised up. We have shown compassion. We have acted enthusiastically. We have been empathetic. We have cultivated truth. We have given good advice. We have respected. We have learned. We have forgiven. We have comforted. We have been creative. We have stirred. We have been spiritual activists. We have been just. We have longed for Israel. We have been merciful. We have given full effort. We have supported, we have contributed, we have repaired. Yigdal, page 250.
יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח, ניצם ואין עת אל מציאותו, אחד ואין יחיד כייחודו. נעלם וגם אין סוף לאחדותו, אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף, לא נערוך אליו ידושתו, קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא, ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו, הינו אדון עולם ולא נוצר, יורה גדולתו ומלכותו, שפן נבואתו נתנו. אלן שי סגולתו ותפארתו, לא קם בישראל כמו שעוד, נביא ומביט את תמונתו, תורת אמת נתן לעמו אל, היה נביאו נאמן ביתו, לא יחד לפעל ולא יאמר דתו. עולמים זולתו, צופף ויודע סתרנו. מביט לסוף דבר בקדמתו, גומל איש חסד כמפעלו, נותן לרשע רע כרשעתו, ישלח לקץ ימין משיחנו, לפתח מחקק את ישועתו, מתים יחלל ברוך חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו,
Let's finish strong.
מתים יחלל ברוך חסדו.
Baruch Adonai, Shem Tehilato. Shana Tova Techatemu, may you be sealed for a good year.